Before there was evil, before the serpent, before the garden, there was him. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a shadow. He wasn't even a warning. He was light, brilliant, exalted, pure. He stood near the throne. He sang the songs that shaped creation, and for a time there was no name held higher among the angels. But perfection is fragile. It doesn't shatter with war. It cracks with thought. Just one. Why not me? And with that, something ancient broke. Something no one expected. Not in heaven's foundations, but in the heart of its brightest star. He appears only in fragments now. A name scattered across verses. A whisper in prophecy. Sometimes a serpent, sometimes a dragon. Sometimes just the adversary. But the damage was real, and it didn't end in heaven. This is not just the story of an angel who fell. This is the story of pride, of rebellion, of what happens when light turns inward and refuses to bow. This is the story of Lucifer, the angel who became heaven's worst enemy. Lucifer wasn't born into rebellion. He didn't rise from chaos. He was created in light. In the earliest traditions, he was called the Morningstar, the brightest herald in the heavens, a being of unmatched beauty and majesty. His name, Lucifer, means lightbringer, a title that once carried awe, not dread. He stood among the angels, not as one of many, but as a singular, radiant being, something closer to perfection than anything that came after. Descriptions of his form are rare, buried in poetry and vision, but they hint at something extraordinary. He shimmered like the jewels of Eden, sapphire, onyx, topaz, and gold. His body was robed in glory, his presence like fire without heat, light without shadow. To look upon him was to feel smaller, not out of fear, but reverence. He didn't command with threats. He inspired with presence. The kind of being others followed not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. He wasn't a messenger. He wasn't a soldier. He was something more. Lucifer is said to have stood near the throne itself, within the innermost sanctum of heaven's design. Some traditions call him a covering cherub, a guardian of divine mystery. Others suggest he held a place higher than the archangels, maybe even a role that no longer exists. Whatever he was, it was exalted. He led worship not with words, but with essence. Some believed music flowed through him, that his very being radiated the harmonies that held creation together. He wasn't just in heaven. He was part of how it functioned, part of how it glowed. He was powerful, respected, beautiful. But beauty like that carries a weight, and brilliance casts long shadows. For a time, there was no blemish, no question, no flaw, but that would not last, not even in heaven. It didn't begin with fire or fury. There was no explosion of rage, no dramatic cry against heaven. It began far more quietly, so quietly that no one noticed at first, not even him. Lucifer wasn't born a villain. He was admired, trusted, and elevated, not just for his beauty, but for the role he played among the angels. He was a steward of harmony, a keeper of the divine order, a radiant presence that others willingly followed. Where he walked, there was light. Where he spoke, there was clarity, and for a time, no one carried the weight of heaven more gracefully. He wasn't arrogant. He was composed. There was a kind of nobility to him, dignified, self-assured, unwavering. Some said his voice could stir the stars. Others claimed his mind was sharper than any sword in the heavenly host. He didn't just follow the rules of heaven, he understood them, preserved them, embodied them. And for ages, that was enough. But something shifted, slowly, quietly, beneath the surface. Lucifer didn't lash out. He questioned, not with bitterness, but with reason. He didn't demand power. He wondered why it wasn't already his. Why should one being rule over all? Why should eternity revolve around a single will? Why shouldn't someone else, someone worthy, stand in that place? The thoughts didn't seem dangerous. Not at first. They arrived like whispers in the dark, threading themselves between his duties, taking root where only obedience had lived before. And because no angel had ever fallen, no one knew what to look for. They saw a leader, a brother, a visionary. No one saw the slow unraveling. He still sang the songs. He still stood near the throne. But in his heart, the center of gravity had shifted. No longer content to serve greatness, he began to imagine becoming it. There were no declarations, no shouts, no fury, only silence. And within that silence, ambition, pride, the first flicker of disobedience. And that, more than anything, is what made it so dangerous. Lucifer didn't crash down all at once. He slipped, starting with just one single thought. He was powerful, but it wasn't just strength that made Lucifer dangerous. It was the way he carried it, like fire in still water, serene on the surface, burning just beneath. Lucifer wasn't simply another angel in the choir. He was among the highest, maybe even the highest, depending on the tradition. Not just in rank, but in brilliance, in command, in sheer, unshakable presence. Where others bowed, he stood. Where others sang, he led the chorus. Where others obeyed, he understood. He is called a covering cherub in ancient texts, positioned so close to the throne of God that some believe he guarded it. Others say he reflected it, the way the moon reflects the sun, radiant, majestic, and alive with borrowed power. And then there was his voice. It wasn't just sound, it was a force, layered, harmonious, resonant beyond human comprehension. A voice that could pull emotion from the bones of reality, that could summon awe, joy, fear, or peace without a single word. With that voice, he led the host of heaven in worship, and when he sang, the angels followed. He had dominion over flame, mastery over light. Some say he could bend the very laws of the higher realms, travel between planes, command energy, sway the spirits of lesser beings with nothing more than a glance. But the most dangerous thing he ever wielded was influence. Lucifer didn't rise by brute force. He didn't have to. His authority was effortless. His presence didn't demand attention, it invited it. Even among angels, he was admired, respected, trusted, and that's what made his betrayal so devastating. Because the war didn't begin with swords, it started with a whisper. Lucifer used his power not to destroy, but to persuade. Quietly, carefully, he planted doubt. Not in God, but in the hierarchy. In the idea that only one will should reign. He spoke not of hatred, but of vision. A new order. A restructured heaven where freedom was not a gift from above, but a right claimed by the worthy. And it worked. He moved through the ranks like wind through tall grass. Subtle, constant, unseen until it was too late. He didn't force angels to join him, he inspired them. He knew their desires, their questions, their hidden longing for purpose beyond endless obedience. He gave them something they didn't know they wanted, the idea of choice. And so an army rose, not from the shadows, but from within heaven itself. Tens, hundreds, perhaps even a third of the host aligned themselves with him, not in open rebellion, but in quiet agreement. They followed not out of fear, but because they believed him. They saw in him a new kind of leader. One of them, flawed, free, powerful, not because he was appointed, but because he dared. The Bible describes what followed in brief poetic terms. There was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon was Lucifer, transformed by pride, twisted not in flesh but in essence. The same being, but darker, sharper. No longer a steward of light, but a force of disruption. And so the heavens shook. Michael rose, not with speeches, not with debate, but with silence and a sword. He didn't come to reason, he came to restore order. The battle that followed wasn't glorious, it wasn't clean, It wasn't filled with noble speeches or divine miracles. It was brutal, grief-stricken. Heaven turned on itself, not because God had failed, but because Lucifer had. He had everything: power, praise, proximity. But he surrendered the one thing that made him truly holy: submission. And without that, he lost. No matter how bright the flame, no matter how deep the conviction, Lucifer's rebellion could not overcome truth. And when it was over, it was final. Lucifer fell, not because he was weak, but because pride always breaks before it bends. There had never been a fall before. No rebellion, no exile, no precedent for what it meant to be cast out of heaven. The hosts of heaven had always known order, harmony, and light. But then came the first fracture, the first defiance, and it belonged to one of their own. When the war ended, he did not fall in silence. He was expelled with force, cast down like lightning, not drifting but plummeting, ripped from the heights where he once stood as one of the mightiest. Some traditions speak of the gates of heaven sealing behind him like iron shutting on an ancient prison. Others imagine a scream echoing through the void, his wings set ablaze until they blackened and curled, trailing fire as he fell through worlds. But he did not fall alone. The host that followed him, those angels who had once stood in the courts of glory, who had once sung the divine harmonies, were torn down with him. 1/3 of heaven, some say. A staggering number. Not traitors by nature, but by belief. They had believed in him, and now they shared his punishment. They were cast down in fire and fury, their forms warped by the fall. Once radiant, now terrifying. Their wings, once symbols of divine purpose, became twisted shapes of wrath. Their voices, once filled with harmony, broke into cries of anguish, mockery, and madness. But like their leader, they did not vanish, they endured. What rose from the ashes was no longer the angel of light. That radiance, the beauty that once commanded awe, was gone, or perhaps worse, corrupted. In its place stood a being reshaped by hate. The pain of rejection, the sting of shame, the fury of ambition denied. Some say his new form reflected his fall. Monstrous, horned, smoldering, his once glorious wings now torn and ragged. His glow turned to shadow. His voice, once like layered choirs, had become a hiss, sharp and cold, filled with venom. A thing to fear, not follow. But others claim the opposite. They say he retained his beauty, that he still glows, still captivates, still speaks in harmonies, because evil, at its most effective, does not come dressed as horror. It comes dressed as desire, as wisdom, as charm. The most dangerous lies aren't ugly, they look like the truth you want to hear. He was no longer Lucifer. That name, the Morning Star, was a relic of what he had been. Now, he was Satan, the adversary, in Hebrew. The accuser, the opposer, the one who stands not beside heaven, but against it. And with this new name came a new role. He would no longer protect the order of creation. He would unravel it. No longer a servant, now a saboteur. No longer a guardian, now a tempter. The angels who fell with him followed suit. They became the first demons, not born from shadow, but from light undone. They retained memories of heaven, of structure, of what once was. And in that memory burned bitterness. Their forms shifted to reflect the weight of that loss. Some monstrous, others still beautiful, their appearances shaped by the sins they chose and the suffering they endured. They became his legions, not bound by chains, but by loyalty twisted through pain. No longer heralds of the divine, but instruments of deception. Each one learned the art of corruption, of seduction, of speaking lies wrapped in truth. They scattered across the realms, some bound beneath the earth, others wandering unseen, but all waiting, watching, whispering. His powers were altered but not erased. He still had influence, still understood the workings of angelic thought, still held authority in his voice. But where once he inspired devotion, now he inspired doubt. Where once he led others in worship, now he lured them toward rebellion. No longer a light to follow, he became a shadow to fall into. He would not build, he would twist. He would not reign in heaven, so he would poison earth. And if he could not be God, then he would become the God of those who refuse him. There would be no need for open armies, no thrones to seize by force. His weapons were subtler, more effective. Whispers, temptations, a perfectly timed question, a truth slightly altered, a desire carefully inflamed. The war was far from over. It had only changed shape. He had lost the heights of heaven, but he still had reach. And now, more than ever, he had purpose. To corrupt what God loved, to ruin what God made, to drag others down the path he had chosen. Not with fire, not with force, but with the same thought that led to his doom. You could be more. Hey everyone, just a quick intermission here. I wanted to say thank you for watching this video. It really means a lot to me. Did you know that over 80% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel? If you've enjoyed this content so far, it would be incredible if you could hit that subscribe button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel grow and ensures that you won't miss any more of our fascinating stories we explore together. Also, if you're feeling generous, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and share with anyone else who may enjoy it. Your support really does make a difference and keeps the content coming. Thanks again, and let's get back to the story. Lucifer had fallen, but he was far from finished. Though cast out of heaven, his presence lingered like smoke from a fire that refused to die. What he had lost in position, he gained in purpose, and that purpose led him not to a battlefield or a throne, but to something far more delicate, the beginning of mankind. The Garden of Eden was untouched, radiant in its purity. It was a place unspoiled by pain or pride, where creation pulsed with divine harmony. Every leaf, every breath, every moment was a reflection of intention. Man and woman walked without shame, their souls uncluttered by fear. There was no violence, no betrayal, no concept of separation from the Creator. It was peace in its most innocent form. And it was here, in this stillness, that he struck. Not with thunder or flame, not with armies or violence. He came softly, silently, not as the monster many would later imagine, but as something clever, familiar, disarming. Scripture describes a serpent, more cunning than any other creature that moved through the garden. But whether serpent meant a literal snake or something more, some hybrid of beauty and intelligence cloaked in subtle power, the truth remains the same. He was persuasive. He did not force his way in. He was not unwelcome. He did not roar. He whispered. His weapon was not pain. It was suggestion. Just a simple question. A seed of doubt. He knew that fracture begins not with rebellion, but with hesitation. And once that hesitation takes root, desire follows. Desire for knowledge, for power, for more. Eve listened, and in time, Adam followed. With that single act, the purity of Eden was undone, not because of the fruit itself, but because of what it represented: mistrust. The moment trust was broken, the bond between Creator and creation began to unravel. Shame entered, innocence fled, eyes opened, not to wisdom, but to the weight of disobedience. The serpent had not simply coaxed them into eating the forbidden apple. He had shifted their hearts. And in that shift came the exile. This was not a victory measured in violence, but in silence, in the subtle cracking of something once whole. Lucifer, now fully cast in the role of Satan, the adversary, had drawn first blood in humanity's story. Not by conquering earth, but by corrupting the one thing heaven had made in its image. He didn't need to seize power. He didn't need to build a kingdom. He only needed to rewrite the first chapter. And he had. The garden was sealed, humanity was cast out, and behind them, in the wake of innocence lost, Satan smiled, not in triumph, but in satisfaction. Heaven was closed to him forever. But earth had only begun to bleed. Lucifer could no longer return to heaven. That door was closed. But the story of his fall did not end in isolation. What he lost in stature, he sought to reclaim in influence. And so he set his sights on something new, not to ascend again, but to hollow out what still stood. He would not build a throne of light. He would not gather armies in open defiance. His kingdom would be something far more dangerous, something quiet, something slow. In the earliest days of mankind, long after Eden had been sealed, a strange current ran beneath the surface of the world. The first cities rose not in harmony, but in pride. The first blood was spilled not in justice, but in rage. And behind every fracture, behind every arrogant gesture or cruel decision, there was a shadow that lingered. Not always visible, but always present. He didn't conquer Earth by force. He colonized it by corruption. Scripture would come to describe him as the God of this world, not in title, but in reach. He was not omnipresent, but he didn't need to be. The systems he planted, greed, fear, vanity, control, did the work for him. Over generations, he laid down a framework of distortion where truth was malleable and worship could be bought. His throne wasn't forged from gold, but built from pride. And all the while, he adapted. He didn't offer destruction. He offered alternatives. He didn't deny the divine. He counterfeited it. He slithered into temples and crowned himself with different names, sometimes as gods, sometimes as kings. Every culture gave him a new face, a new story. But the eyes behind those masks never changed. Whether clothed in law, myth, or monarchy, his message remained the same. You don't need to serve. You can rule. Lucifer no longer wore the form of heaven's guardian. He became something else entirely, a force of distortion, a presence that twisted without needing to touch. And nowhere is this more disturbingly clear than in the book of Job. There, he stands not as a beast or monster, but as an accuser permitted to speak in heaven's court. Not because he holds power, but because God allows the trial. He doesn't lash out. He poses a question. Does Job fear God for nothing? It was a challenge not of strength, but of intent. He cast righteousness as a transaction, goodness as a means to reward. And that was the shape of his deception. He learned that the most effective lies weren't bold, they were plausible. He stopped breaking men with force and began unraveling them with questions. Subtle provocations, misleading logic. He blurred the line between freedom and rebellion, between enlightenment and arrogance. He knew what made people move, their fears, their ambitions, their need to feel in control, and he gave each exactly what they wanted. To the proud, he gave praise. To the fearful, control. To the broken, excuses. And to all, a new center, the self. His greatest power was not in violence, it was in redirection. He didn't just oppose God, he redefined the terms of obedience. And that, more than any fire or fury, became his kingdom. A slow rot, a hidden hand, a voice, not in thunder, but in thought. Not a monster in the dark, a deceiver in the light. In all of Scripture, there is no rivalry more profound, nor more misunderstood, than that between Lucifer and Christ. One is the Word made flesh, the light that no darkness could overcome. The other, the light that turned inward, the brilliance that broke. They are not equals, not in power, not in origin, but in story, they stand opposite one another. One obeyed, one rebelled, one descended in humility, the other in pride, and across time, they met. Their relationship is not one of siblings or mirrored divinities, but of roles that collide, justice and accusation, salvation and temptation, the shepherd and the wolf. And when they crossed paths, the world shifted. It happened not in heaven, nor in hell, but in the silence of the wilderness. Christ had just begun his earthly mission. baptized, chosen, and led by the Spirit into solitude. And it was there, after 40 days without food, that Satan came. He did not attack, he questioned. "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become bread." It wasn't hunger he preyed upon, it was identity. He offered food, then fame, then power, all the kingdoms of the world, all the glory, all without suffering. And Christ, unlike Adam, unlike Israel, unlike every soul before him, did not break. He answered not with defiance, but with scripture, not with anger, but with truth. This was Lucifer's second great failure. He had tempted angels, he had swayed mankind. But now, face to face with the incarnate Word, he could not penetrate the silence of obedience. And so, he left him until a more opportune time. But Satan wasn't finished. In the shadows of the Gospels, Satan entered into Judas Iscariot, not by force, but by invitation. Through bitterness, through pride, through quiet disappointment. It was not a wild possession. It was a whispered agreement. Judas betrayed Christ with a kiss, selling the Son of Man for silver. And in that act, Lucifer believed he had won. That the cross was a failure. That death had claimed the divine. But what he didn't see, what he never understood, was that the cross wasn't defeat. It was a door. 3 days passed. And then something happened that no prince of darkness expected. The gates of hell broke. According to ancient Christian tradition, especially the Gospel of Nicodemus and writings from the early church, Christ descended into the realm of the dead, not as a victim, but as a conqueror. In some accounts, Lucifer and Hades argue. Hades, the personified underworld, senses doom. Lucifer, the eternal accuser, mocks him, but neither can stop what comes next. The chains are shattered, the gates fall, and the righteous souls, Adam, Eve, David, the prophets, are lifted out, led by Christ in triumph. Lucifer is humiliated, not by force, but by mercy. Lucifer and Christ are never truly in conflict as equals, but they are in conflict as opposites. Lucifer sought to rise above God. Christ descended below all things. Lucifer wanted to reign without suffering. Christ suffered to reign. One grasped at divinity and fell. The other released divinity and rose. And in this, their stories split. Lucifer became the adversary, the one who divides, accuses, and distorts. Christ became the Redeemer, the one who heals, intercedes, and restores. Their paths crossed briefly, but their contrast lingers forever. Where Lucifer spreads the wound, Christ is the scar that heals. Where Lucifer whispers, "You could be more," Christ replies, "You are already loved." And in the end, it will not be a battle that decides their fate. It will be a judgment, one that has already been written. It was always leading here, for all his cunning, for all the ages spent shaping the course of human history from the shadows. Lucifer's story was never going to end in triumph. The book of Revelation offers no ambiguity, no escape. His final chapter is not one of mystery, but of clarity, cold, uncompromising, and absolute. After millennia bound in the abyss, there comes a moment, foretold and unavoidable, when he is released. Not as a gesture of mercy, not as a second chance, but as a final test. One last moment to expose the hearts of men and prove once more what he truly is. He emerges not in disguise, not clothed in subtlety or charm. The age of masks is over. Now he stands unveiled. The deceiver returns to the world he once twisted, and immediately, instinctively, he does what he has always done. He gathers the scattered and the proud, the bitter and the blind, multitudes from every corner of the earth drawn together by the old temptation, the belief that God can still be challenged. But this is no final war. There is no true clash of good and evil. There is only the illusion of one. Before a single blow can be struck, before the army he has raised can lift their voices or blades, fire rains down from heaven. Not the fire of vengeance, but of finality. It falls swiftly, with no resistance. There is no battle, only judgment. Lucifer is seized, not in combat, but by decree. His authority, once boundless in influence, dissolves. The voice that once stirred rebellion across realms is silenced. The mind that once warped truth is emptied of power. He is no longer the serpent, the accuser, or the prince of anything. He is a prisoner. Stripped of titles, stripped of purpose, all that remains is the echo of what he was and the weight of what he caused. And then comes the sentence, the lake of fire. Not a kingdom, not a realm to rule, but a place of final exile. It is not his domain, it is his cell. Here, he does not reign over demons or tempt the lost. He does not pull the strings from the shadows or whisper behind veils. Here, he is nothing, no longer feared, no longer followed. He is bound in silence and cast into oblivion. His punishment is not just pain, it is erasure, a complete and eternal separation from the divine light he once stood before. For all the fear he inspired, for all the kingdoms he tainted and the souls he led astray, his end is not grand or noble. It is a caution, a grim reminder of what pride becomes when it runs its full course. Lucifer, once the morning star, ends not as a god, not as a legend, but as a warning etched into eternity. Lucifer's story didn't end with his exile or even his judgment. It left a mark on theology, on myth, on the way we define evil itself. Whether seen as literal truth or powerful symbol, his fall became the ultimate warning, a tale of pride unrestrained, of ambition turned against its maker. Over time, his image evolved, a serpent in the garden, a dragon cast from the sky, a whisperer, a tempter, an adversary. Sometimes tragic, sometimes terrifying, but always the same message beneath it all. Even the brightest can fall. And that idea of light becoming shadow stayed with us. Lucifer became more than a character. He became the standard by which all rebellion is measured, a living symbol of defiance and of what unfolds when creation dares to rise against its creator. Not just a villain, not just a name, but a legacy, etched in every story that dares to ask, what if?